Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today, we're going to make a jig to flatten some wonky boards. I'm in the middle of a project that requires some fairly large boards. And while sometimes I get my stock milled on all four sides, this time I had to get it rough. The problem is, this one's got a bit of a twist, and this one's got some cupping, and well, the short ones aren't too bad, but they're all really heavy. This is 8/4 by 8-inch maple, and it's about 6 feet long. And since I don't have a jointer, this would be really hard to level out through the planer. I figured let's use some of that slab flattening technology and build one for ourselves. Let's see if we can pull this one off.
I started by ripping down 4 strips of 3/4 inch plywood to about 2 3/4 of an inch and left them at 8 feet long. After being glued together, I sent them through my planer for a pass or two on either side to clean up that glue joint and keep them even. And if you're cringing at watching me plane plywood, how do you think I feel? Those are new blades. For the base, I picked up a 14-inch by 8-foot melamine shelf. Well, I would have gotten a shelf, but after 2 stores, I settled on this. Regardless, to connect the melamine to the plywood sides, I located several points about 12 inches apart and offset them so that every other screw went into both pieces of the plywood. I used an awl on my mallet to define each of the screw locations. With the near side clamped in place, I used my countersink to drill the pilot hole at each location on the first side. If you're wondering about the parallel clamps, they're there to pull the plywood sides in where they bowed out a bit. Now I can come back and drive in some number 8 by 2 inch screws at each location. With that done, I clamped the other side in place and drilled and fastened like before. To start on the sled, I picked up some 1¼ inch aluminum angle and cut 2 pieces about 6 inches wider than my base. Working with aluminum is like a really hard wood, except the splinters can be a lot hotter. Anywho, just go slow and you get a nice clean cut. An angle grinder would work too, but they are slower and they leave a rougher edge. A few passes with the file and the burrs from the blade are cleaned up. I decided that my DeWalt router would be the best for this process. Not only is it variable speed, but it takes a 1/2 inch shank router bit and its parallel edges should move easily in the sled. I cut 2 pieces of 3/4 inch ply about a 1/16 inch wider than the base of the router and set them in place and gave it a test. I want the router to move easily in the sled. With the spacers just the right size, it's time to connect everything. I started by drilling 2 3/16 inch holes on either end of both strips. These locations will put the screws about 1 inch in from the edge of my plywood spacers. I swapped out the drill bit for a countersink and set the depth so that my number 8 screws would sit just below the face of the aluminum. The pine block is here to support the angle stock since I'm drilling in from the back. And apparently after 20 plus years, my countersink seems to be getting a bit dull. I clamped my spacers in place so they were flush to the ends of the aluminum and used a self-centering VIX bit to pre-drill the first 2 holes. I drove in 2 number 8 by 3/4 inch screws and then did the same for the far side. With the filler secured in place, I came back, drilled the 4 remaining pilot holes, and then drove in the other fasteners. One more check and the router moves easily in the sled. I cut 2 runners from some scrap poplar, clamped the first in place, ensuring that it was square to the sled. Then I used my countersink to pre-drill for the number 8 by 1¼ inch screws I'll use to hold them together. To determine where that second runner should sit, I placed a 32nd-inch spacer under the sled, set the runner in place, and then secured it as before. Again, I want the sled to move easily on the base, and I'm hoping this provides enough clearance. The planer left a clean but not super smooth finish on the rails, so I gave them a quick sanding with some 220 paper. I also took the time to ease the edges, mostly to remove any splinters that could attack me while I'm handling this thing. This could have been a one-day build, but I left my paste wax at the house. Now that I've got it, I coated the contact surfaces of the base, mostly the top and outside of both plywood rails for starters. I also added more wax on the sled where it ran along the base, both on the runners and the aluminum rails where the sled will make contact. I also thought it would help to use a little T9 on the aluminum rails where the router will ride. And while I was at it, I rubbed some on the base of the router too. The goal is to have everything move smoothly and not bind up. None of my regular bits would handle this task well, so I picked up this 2-inch diameter 6-wing slab flattening bit. That's a hefty chunk of steel, but it does come with replaceable carbide tips, although I don't see using this often enough to worry about that for a while. And this is the largest bit I've ever used in a handheld router. In most of my videos, I do a test run before I begin to record, but let's just jump in. I've got stops clamped in front and back to secure my material. This piece was fairly flat, so I didn't need any shimming. I set my cutter for a shallow first pass, worked the entire face, and then came back for the next pass. Then it was trim, reset, and repeat. A few things I learned. Take shallow passes. You don't want this bit to bind up or dig in. And don't rush your work. Yes, it took me about an hour to clean up all these boards, but that bit is huge and bad things can happen if you push it. Finally, a bit this size needs to go slow. I reduced my speed to 12,000 RPM, the second slowest speed on my router. With all that said, it took just over 4 minutes to clean up the first face on this 42-inch long board. The finish isn't perfect, but the board is now flat enough to run through the planer. And just so you know, this is a messy process. With the second board, I had to drop in a few shims to support the board so it wouldn't move during the process. I added a spacer on the right side to help prevent movement, as the spin of the bit wants to push the board in that direction. I also added my dust hose to see if that helped. There's less mess, but I'm not sure it's worth the hassle of dealing with the cord and the hose while cleaning up the face. I didn't work the entire face flat, just about 90%. Again, that provides enough stable surface for the planer to register. The remaining low spots can be cleaned up faster and easier at the planer. The longer boards were cleaned up the same way, they just needed more shims for stability, and a few more passes to get the board to a workable state. All in all, I think this was worth the effort, and I can now flatten longer and heavier boards than I've been able to deal with before.
I think all in, the flattening jig ran me about $60 in materials and another $60 for the router bit. And since 8-inch joiners start around $3,000 and they need 220 power, neither of which I have at the moment, this was a good option. That, and I really don't want to pick up any more machines until I move back to my shop. It was a relatively easy build, simple to use, just don't push it. I am contemplating adding a permanent stop here to secure my materials, maybe end stops here so the sled doesn't fly off the ends, but I'll work on that next time. Love to hear your thoughts on this video. Is there something I could have done easier, smarter, safer? Drop them in the comments below. As usual, I'll add some links to the tools and equipment I use in this build and some of the stuff I use here in the shop on a regular basis. Some of them will have affiliate links, and if you need one of those items and purchase it through those links, it does help keep the channel going. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. If you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button and a little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. I'm not real sure what's coming up next because the jobs I'm working on in the shop, not only do I have to finish them, but they have to be installed in a house that's not done yet. So it's still a mystery. So until then, whatever we come up with, have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.